Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Speak On It. I am your boy, R.W. Coolins. First and foremost, giving honor to the guy who allows me to come to you in this manner on a weekly basis. 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. That's what we do here every Saturday morning on the Speak On the Show. We're broadcasting live on YouTube and Facebook. I appreciate everybody tuning in this morning. I appreciate you. I got a good one for you this morning, y'all. I got a special guest coming on with me, but let's get these formalities out the way. rwcoolins.com. That's over all social media platforms. RW Coolins on Facebook, YouTube, Universe, wherever you do your social media, RW Coolins on all those platforms. Go there, like, share, subscribe, do what you do with all the other people you may follow. Come on, get these people coming in for the show. 844-904-2665, 844-904-2665. No matter what the situation is, let your voice be heard. All we ask is say what you mean what you say. We come in as friends, we leave as family. That's what we do here on the Speak On the Show every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. Terrence Collins, good morning, my brother. Good morning. Appreciate you tuning in. Appreciate the support. Brian Hoodie, appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you. Thank you for tuning in. For all you out there listening this morning, I appreciate you for who you are and what you bring to me to make me a better person than I was yesterday and to become a better person tomorrow. That's what we do here on the Speak On the Show. So before we go any further, let me go ahead and bring my boy Phil McCurdy. 15 years in law enforcement. 15 years now. So he done seen some things. Let's just be real. He done seen some things and done some things. But we're going to have him on this morning. We're going to talk about some things. We're going to go over some current events while we have him in here. But I think there's some things that we've talked about on this show dealing with, judicial system, prison reform, and all that. We've talked about these things, but I wanted to have him on, and he may not be an expert at all of them, but he can give us some insight on some of it because he's been in there long enough to know. So don't y'all get frustrated if he ain't giving you the exact answer you want, all that kind of stuff. We'll need that this morning. So without further ado, my man, 100 grand, Phil McCurdy. What's going on, my brother?
Morning, bro.
What's happening?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, man. You look good there, bro. You looking good.
Thank you. Trying.
Janice
Trying to get my beard to look like yours.
No, bro. You're doing good. You're doing good. Janice McCurdy. That's my dad. Well, thank you for tuning in. Is Janice? Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, Janice. Yeah, that's correct.
Janice. Appreciate you for tuning in. Yeah, that's your dad. That's my partner now. We're going to get into this today. Thanks for tuning in. So, man, law enforcement.
Yes, sir.
15 years.
15 years.
What made you choose that route, man? What made you choose the law enforcement route?
I say ultimately, man, it was just something that I felt like I wanted to do to try to help make a difference within the community. As corny as that may sound, but at the time when I did join law enforcement, it was one of those things I just wanted to make a difference, man. Get out there and make a difference. You didn't see too many brothers or sisters out there doing that type of work at the time, so I felt like that was my calling.
Where'd you start at? Were you in Florida at the time, or were you?
Correct. I started in a small town called Palatka, Florida, and then eventually transferred over to the Clay County Sheriff's Office in Florida.
Okay. So now I see you on here because you sent me a little bio and everything. So we're gonna jump into this right now. So you have conducted investigations in the crime organizations that like mafia type stuff?
Organized crime, drug trafficking organizations, sex trafficking, and so forth and so on.
Oh, okay. So stop right there for a minute because I want to ask this question because we hear organized crime.
Correct.
What exactly, when you say organized crime, what exactly does that mean for the people out there like me who don't know? When they hear organized crime, they could go so many different ways. What does organized crime mean?
Just like any type of structured organization where you have ranking individuals, lieutenants, generals, and so forth, or directors or what have you. That's basically where your term organized crime would come from. You have somebody at the top, then you have that middle management in between that help facilitate the soldiers who are the street guys, so to speak, out on the street.
Okay. All right. And I guess it makes sense now that you said it, but I always say organized crime. What are the parameters of that? But you got a head and you got all the other people doing what they do.
Right. Okay. And they're basically following orders. They're being told, where to go, when to go, what to do when you get there, and so forth and so on. Nobody's thinking solely as like a individual, if you will. Nobody's, doing their own thing. They're doing it as a unit.
Okay. All right. Just like a regular business then, basically.
Correct.
Just got crime at the end of it, right? So you also said that you, well, let me just go back over some of the stuff that you've done in your career. Traffic homicide investigator. Traffic homicide. Is that like an accident where somebody died, or what's traffic homicide?
That's exactly what it is. Somebody, just an accident where somebody lost their life, unfortunately. You have people that are trained specifically to come out and investigate those types of incidents.
Oh, okay. Well, like I said, I told y'all, he done seen some things. Patrol detective, I think we all understand it. Master deputy. What's a master deputy? What would that entail?
Master deputy within my agency, a master deputy was like one rank below a sergeant at the time. So basically, you had your chevron on your sleeve and so forth. You were more or less responsible for training and helping newer deputies come along, rookies, if you will, that didn't really know the road as well as what you may have known it. So a lot of younger guys would look to some of the senior guys to get answers on certain things and so forth, that they couldn't get in touch with the supervisor, or if the supervisor just was unavailable, maybe the supervisor was on another call or what have you, they were unavailable, they would hit me up and say, hey, this is what I got. How should I proceed with this?
Oh, okay. So now we got a question already, bro. We already got a question from UDK. What was your first sex trafficking detail? Now, if you can't go into it, you can't go into it. But
I just say these massage parlors that you see left and right through most cities and across the nation, these Asian specifically massage parlors. Let's just say that there's some sex trafficking going on with some of those massage parlors.
Okay. All right. Hopefully that answers your question, UDK.
I'm familiar with him, so I think I know where he's going with that.
Oh, okay. He went there, huh? He went there. Yeah. When I seen it before I put it up here, when I seen it, I was like, I think he knows him. I think he's trying to slide something. Okay, so then, and we'll go over some of the other stuff. I mean, field training officer, site safety officer, SWAT armored vehicle operator, MRAP, or the MRAP vehicle, right?
Correct. Mine resistant, ambush protected. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Organized crime detective. Yeah, I want to get into that undercover thing there. And Tri-County Task Force investigator. So,
correct.
We all watch movies. We all see movies and things, and we see when a cop or, an officer goes undercover. How easy or how disciplined do you need to be if they put you undercover to maintain that you are undercover without crossing that line of going to the other side? Because, we always see where somebody goes undercover and they go rogue or whatever.
Correct.
How's that balance work, man? Because I think if you're in that world, because I think in my mind, I'm thinking you're undercover. You're trying so hard to not be exposed that you tend to cross that line sometimes to prove that you should be there, so they don't think you ain't supposed to be there. How does that work?
Well, first of all, you know what your rules are. Just like with military folks, the rules of engagement, so to speak. You know what your rules are, what you can and can't do. Or excuse me, what you can and can't do, and what you should and should not do. Right. I'm gonna say that. Have there been cases in the past with some officers, I mean, let's keep it real, have gone too far, which we're seeing that a lot nowadays? Absolutely. For me, it was a thing of the support that was in place was things such as supervisors, colleagues, and so forth that would deal with me daily. So I could basically debrief to them and let them know what was going on and so forth and so on. For me, again, as an individual, I never put myself in a situation to where I would violate what my standing orders were not to do. I knew, like I couldn't step over this line. So I'd come up with whatever excuse to get me out of that certain situation, just to be able to say, hey, man, listen, I can't do that. However, I can do this and move on from there.
Yeah. So integrity plays a big part in it.
Very big. Integrity is a huge part of any aspect of law enforcement. I don't care whether it's just a uniform guy coming to answer a theft of a bicycle, right up to a homicide investigator. Integrity is huge in law enforcement. Huge.
Yeah. We got another comment. Julie Keener Pira. What's up, sis? We have a serious problem with massage parlors in the city I work in. I think you might have to put the uniform back on up there, bro. And head on back up there. Head on back up there to Georgia, and find out what's going on up there. Thanks for the comment.
So again, with the massage parlor thing, let me say this. On the outside looking in, a lot of people don't realize what's going on behind closed doors when they go in, when they see those massage parlors all over the place. They look like legitimate businesses on the outside looking in. However, once you get past that, once you peel that onion back and get past those layers, a lot of these massage parlors, these Asian women are sleeping inside the businesses, and they're using hot plates in the back of them and so forth and so on. But on the outside, it looks legit by everybody walking through the door to get serviced, if you will, but behind closed doors, it's going on.
Yeah.
And it's going on. It'll be right around the corner from you. You won't even realize what's happening.
So let me ask this question. I think we all seen in the news when Robert Kraft got jacked up down there in Florida in the massage parlor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of got swept under the rug per se or whatever. And I'm trying to remember, was there sex trafficking involved in that massage parlor that they did, or do you remember? Because I'm trying to remember.
I don't recall all the details with it to know whether or not it was brought up to a sex trafficking level. Because when you start talking about sex trafficking, it moves from traditional law enforcement, like the local agencies just investigating it, it moves up into a federal level at that point. Homeland Security would get involved and so forth.
So there's levels to it. There's
right,
levels before.
Correct. Because the penalties will be stiffer if you allow the federal law enforcement agencies to step in and pick up some of those cases as opposed to it being done at a state level.
Oh, okay. Makes sense, I guess. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because there's always levels to these things.
Correct.
So I was talking to you before we came on, and this morning, for everybody that hasn't been looking at the news, because we had this conversation about news yesterday, we gonna get you right on that. But former President Donald Trump this morning put a social media post out, and he said that, being the leading Republican candidate and former president of the United States, he's going to be arrested Tuesday of next week. This is what he said in his post, and I'm paraphrasing it, so I'm going to go raw into it. But at the end of it, he said, "Protest, take our nation back." Now, I seen also in this article that, and I'm saying this also for everybody to be aware that if this happens on Tuesday, be aware of your surroundings, be aware of what's going on, because you got people out here that are staunch Trump supporters. And because if he's going to be arrested on Wednesday or Tuesday of next week, and he's telling people to protest, you got some of these people going to take this very seriously. Mm-hmm. So I just want to put that out there first. But it leads into my question I want to ask you, because I've seen in the article where they were talking about they've been negotiating with the DA and all of them as far as him turning himself in and all that kind of stuff, mug shots and all that. But on the other side, the New York Police Department and all the law enforcement in that area are ramping up for possible protests.
Mm-hmm.
So in an instance like that, when you see something like this or you hear that, and you being in that, what starts clicking in that? What are they doing? What could be going on in that time period? And before I say this, is this technically inciting a riot per se? I just throw it out there.
Okay. Well, as we saw with his last protest, the Capitol incident, is there potential for a riot to go down there? Absolutely. You see how some people take it to the extreme. Some of the Trump supporters take it very much to the extreme, and they're willing to go ahead and commit violence, tear up property and so forth based on their beliefs in this one individual, I'll say. Secondly, as far as the planning phase, anytime you have any sort of demonstration, anything of that nature going on in any city, law enforcement will start planning the security measures, the possible medical, if any issues like that, any rescue issues, as far as rescue, when I mean rescue, fire department, so forth, getting in to come take care of injured individuals. They're already starting to make plans weeks and weeks in advance. Preparation. You have teams that will be positioned strategically around this type of event. That way, in case something does jump off, where maybe you might have an active shooter situation or something of that nature, they'll be able to respond quickly, as opposed to they'll be proactive as opposed to being reactive. So there's a lot of different levels of planning that take place weeks in advance. And I'm talking about they would even go as far as to get with his personal security. And they're going to sit down and they're going to, work out details with his personal security, what route would be traveled in and out and so forth and so on. So it's a lot of different levels that go into something of this nature.
Yeah, because I did see also on there that they said his Secret Service detail will be the ones escorting him to New York.
Correct.
To go through the
correct
or whatever they
correct.
got.
Because him being an ex-president, which I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, but once you hold the office of president of the United States, even post that office, being out of that office, you still have full-time Secret Service protection for the remainder of your life. That's part of the job.
Yeah.
Should you choose to accept it, I'll say that's part of the job.
Because I know, and I know a lot of people hear this. I'm not sure if a lot of people catch it, but also when you're actually a candidate running, they have some type of secrets. It may not be the full potential that you get as president, but when you're running, those candidates get the protection as well. So
that is correct.
Yeah, it makes sense. So when I seen it this morning, man, I just had to ask this question about it, man, because we get, we always hear about, unwarranted traffic stops or things going awry and all this.
Right.
But the concentration is never on, and I won't say it's never on, but we never really hear and discuss the crime at the organized crime level of somebody at that stature, at that level.
Right.
Because we look at it and say, well, you got so many people that support this person.
Right.
He says these things and then, everybody blows it off like, oh, he's just blowing smoke. But you never know you got to think about it. Terrorist organizations follow a person just because. Let's just be real. Terrorist organizations follow people just because they had the same ideology. However, in this case, they won't call a former president a terrorist, organizer.
Right.
But they'll just say, go out there and protest. So I'll ask you this question too when you talk about protests, because we always hear when it comes to, in 9 times out of 10, let's just start there. 9 times out of 10, when there's protests dealing with, as we recently know, Black Lives Matter movement, there's protests dealing with people like us. There's always this perception and there's always this view that when we protest, the amount of presence and of police officers, law enforcement officers, when we're protesting is a whole lot different when other folks are protesting. From a person who was in law enforcement, can you say that that's true, or is it just optics, or is it the reporting of news agencies? Because for us, from the outside looking in, it's like, well, damn, they got all kinds of cops out there just because we decide to have some kind of demonstration. But at the same time, we can look at January 6th and say, well, when they look like them, it's either brought up as a failure in the planning of protection, or they did their job, but not to the best they could have done it. You know what I'm saying? Right. So help me understand that to a certain extent for those that have those optics.
Again, speaking just from my personal experience, when you deal with any sort of demonstration or protest, anything like that, there are planning phases that are put into effect. Again, there are so many people that agency where the event is going to be hosted. There are so many people that they're looking, and when I say people, officers, that they're looking to come in and assist with that. So it's not just a thing of crowding the event with officers to make a presence known to try to intimidate anybody, if you will. You got to remember they're also there to protect the ones that are there exercising their right to protest as well. So that means, like you were just saying, maybe a failure in planning, the proper planning back in January. That's a prime example. If I don't have enough people there in place to protect those individuals that have the right to come out and protest, now that also falls back on me. So just for each agency is different. Some agencies are bigger than others. So some agencies may say, hey, listen, we need to have X amount of officers here because we're expecting a crowd of this many. They may not have the manpower just solely by themselves. So they may actually chime out and say, hey, we need mutual aid. So they're going to ask these other agencies surrounding them, hey, can you send us some more guys as well to help assist with this? It's not, again, not always intimidation thing, but they do have a responsibility to protect the protesters just as well, because it is a public safety issue.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think there is some misperceptions as far as what the officers that are there for.
Correct.
Because a lot of times because we've seen, and I'm going to say this, and I know we got a comment in here, so we'll get to that in a minute, but I'm going to say this is we historically have always seen that when we disagree with something or something's not the way we want, we protest.
Right.
We march, we protest.
Right.
And I think the visuals of what we've always done and the way it was always responded to back when you're talking about Jim Crow and the civil rights movement and things like that, the perception is whenever we protest, the officers are out there in riot gear, and I mean, they're tear gas and all those type things.
Right.
Where we don't see those visuals a lot with the protest that others may do.
Right.
So I think that perception comes in, and when you made the point that they're out there for the protection of those who are protesting peacefully,
right,
is the main purpose.
Right.
I think that clears up a lot.
Right. And just like you just brought up the Jim Crow era, I mean, now would I say that was more intimidation,
right,
compared to nowadays? Nowadays it's a thing of public safety as well. Because at 5 o'clock, nobody wants to turn on the news at 5 o'clock and see where the NAACP was having a peaceful demonstration, and all of a sudden they get mowed down by somebody in a tractor trailer or whatever, and proper medical or proper law enforcement presence wasn't on scene for 12, 15 minutes until after the incident. No, that's why they put them in place then, ahead of time. Again.
Yeah. Well, this is going to swing a little bit, and I had this wrote down, and it goes along with something I talked to you about earlier, and this comes from my boy Reggie Piro. Reggie says, knowing you feel and the good brother you are, what was your take on the incident in Memphis?
Great question. Very, very tragic. Should never have happened. Those officers definitely need to be dealt with. But I think it shows us as a people, I believe this, both as a law enforcement officer and a Black man, it shows us that wrong can be done by anybody, no matter what color your skin is. These were Black officers that did that to a Black man. Not white officers that did this to a Black man, Black officers that did this to a Black man. I think they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, right on over to the medical personnel that showed up after he was injured. I don't know if anybody saw, for however many people saw the video, they didn't even render proper aid to this man. And he's sitting down there, leaning up against the car on the ground, injured. And proper aid wasn't even administered to him. These types of things, they need to hold these professionals accountable for those types of incidents, because that's unexcusable.
So I'm going to piggyback on that, and I'm going to ask this question because, we in our community, when we see things like this, I'll just give you a prime example. Normally when we hear, because normally we hear before we see back in the day.
Yes.
And we hear something like this happening. 5 police officers beat up a young Black male motorist and everything like that. First thing you think of is white officers. That's just how we've been conditioned, because that's what we've seen a lot of times, right?
Yes, sir.
So then, and the outrage is, tremendous. But then in this incident, we seen it and we seen the video, and then you still had some of us who were outraged, but not to the extent of if they were white officers. I'll ask the question, if you being a former officer, if you were in that say if you were still a law enforcement officer right now, and you had to work with these guys, or you knew who these guys were when this happened, right? After it happened, because most of us can see the potential in certain people, what they can do and what they will do, that pushes that line.
You're right.
So being in that situation, if you were one of the officers attached to that precinct and you seen this, would you be able to run back in your mind some of the things that you've seen them do in the past and know that they were capable of that? Or would it be something where you just say, these were a few bad apples? Which way would it go, do you think?
I don't think there's a universal answer for that one, because some people, like you said, some people will show those warning signs ahead of time, and you have to be strong enough mentally. You have to be strong enough as an individual in that career to be able to say, wait a minute, I'm noticing so-and-so when we go to certain calls and such and so forth, so-and-so is a little heavy-handed. I think it's about time for me to go check with the supervisor or internal affairs or whatever and let them know what I'm starting to see. That way, maybe that can get cut off at the beginning. That way you don't have to worry about that type of incident coming to light as we just saw in Memphis. At the same time, there are incidents that are popping up here recently, and have been doing so over the years, where you have officers that are getting into trouble, but they have like a clean or impeccable record within their agency and never been reported. Now, that's not to say that the warning signs were not there ahead of time. The warning signs could have been there, but they could have been ignored. So again, that's why I say there's not just one universal answer for it.
Yeah. Well, we got another comment, but I want to piggyback on something you said, because my question would be also on that would be, when we talk about, going to internal affairs or reporting it to somebody, then you get into the point of how hesitant is a person to do that. And we've always heard this. How hesitant is a person to do that because they're worried about the consequences or the repercussions they may get compared to the person that they see getting out of line.
That is correct.
How thin is that line there, man? I mean, the peer pressure and all that.
I'd be lying if I said it doesn't exist. It does. It's not supposed to. Are there policies and general orders and so forth in place to prevent you from being targeted if you were a quote unquote, whistleblower? Absolutely. In writing, those policies are in place to protect the whistleblower or what have you, or the person is doing the right thing by reporting the rogue or bad officer, if you will. However, from being on the inside, I've seen it. Absolutely, where somebody doing the right thing speaks up against an officer, whether it be the same rank or even of a higher rank, doing something wrong. They speak up, see this, because they've seen this officer doing something wrong, and all of a sudden, it's like every door in the agency is being closed to them. Their career is basically dead in the water at that point.
So is there anything, and I'll ask it this way, is there anything that officer can do outside of the organization because these things are happening? Once he decides he wants to come forward, all these doors are closing and people are treating him like, like the plague or whatever. Mm-hmm. What other avenues does that person have? And the reason I ask that is because when those doors start closing, that's where, and I'm gonna just throw it out there, that's where I think that blue code of silence comes into play. Mm-hmm. So how do you get around that?
And I'm gonna tell you from personal knowledge of stuff that I've seen happen. Unfortunately, one particular case that I'm speaking of that I know of, that something like that to happen, where an officer spoke up against a superior, which led to an internal affairs investigation and so forth and so on. Even though he didn't do anything wrong by reporting the superior, he was basically blackballed. So much to the point where his career was made dormant at that agency, and he had to eventually apply at a different agency just to get out from under the thumb of those above him, because he knew he wasn't going to advance anymore within that agency. And it was wrong. Yeah. All day long, it was wrong. And then you look at other things as well, based on how he was treated and so forth. Fortunately, this officer was smart enough. He knew what his rights were. He consulted an attorney and so forth and so on. And then he went back after the agency civilly. And I'm not sure the full outcome of that. I'm not even sure if it's been finalized or what have you since. But he knew what his rights were and he dealt with it. And I to this day, I still give him kudos for that, because he still stood up. He knew what was right and what should have been done, and he stood up for it and went through with it, no matter what the cost was.
Yeah, that goes back to that integrity we talked about from the beginning.
100%
He didn't allow his integrity to waver, and he was
Yeah.
willing to deal with the consequences by
Yeah.
following through what he knew was right and wrong.
Absolutely.
Okay, we got a question here from Malcolm Hill. Good morning, gentlemen. What would you recommend for someone to do to try and be prepared for civil unrest if it happens in the area you live in? Oh, good question.
That is a great question, Malcolm.
Oh, and
I can only say, just, keep your head on a swivel. Be ready for it. Do you as an individual in most states, you as an individual, do you have the right to defend your home? Absolutely. So you want to be prepared. And when I say prepared, I'm not talking about, you don't have to go out and prepare for the apocalypse, so to speak. But no, be prepared. Keep your head on the swivel. If stuff goes overboard and people start going to the point where they're going to start rioting, they're going to start looting homes and so forth. Hey, I tell you, like I tell anybody else back when I was still on the job, you have the right to do what you need to do to protect your family while you are in your home. Most states, the law is clear on that. You do not have to retreat in your own home in most states. Meaning if I'm already inside my house, these fools come and kick my door in or whatever because they're going crazy out in the streets or what have you. I don't have to run and go lock myself in the bathroom or in the bedroom or what have you. I have the right to defend myself and my family at that point, even if it means using deadly force.
Y'all heard it. I didn't say it. I didn't. No, I say that jokingly, but no, that's and what you just said. A lot of people need to understand it because I think one thing I think in our community is we get nervous about going out and doing the things that other folks do to protect themselves and their property and their home and their family. When we talk about open carry, when we talk about concealed carry permits, when we talk about even just buying a weapon or a gun, I think a lot of times we're hesitant because we're worried about the consequences because we don't look a certain way if we have to use it to protect ourselves.
Right.
But you can kind of comment on this, but I think we have to remember that the law covers us no matter what. They can't pick and choose, which they do sometimes, but they really can't pick and choose which one covers you and which one doesn't cover you at the time when you're trying to protect yourself.
And again, like I was just saying, the Constitution even speaks on it. Your home basically is your castle, so to speak. So if I invade your home, again, I'm not telling everybody to go out and go do this. I can only tell you how I'll put it like this. I'll tell you how I would react.
Right.
If I'm in my home in the middle of the night or even clear day or what have you, I'm in my home, somebody that I do not know kicks in my door and invades my home. I can only assume one thing, that you mean to do me bodily harm.
Exactly.
I'm going to do what I have to do to defend myself and my family at that point. Unfortunately, if it means that I have to use deadly force, then that's unfortunate, but I'm going to defend myself and my family at that point. You chose to put yourself in that situation by invading my residence, not the other way around.
Yeah. And that's the thing and I will piggyback on what Phil said. If you're going to go out here and buy a weapon to protect your home, be smart about it. Be smart about how you handle it. Be smart about where you store it. Because we hear too many stories about kids getting guns, shooting or killing themselves in the home of the gun owner and all those type things. So just make sure your safety is top.
And that's paramount. Just to follow up with what you just said about safety, I tell people, if you're going to go purchase a weapon, every state that I know of, every state has some sort of safety course you can take as a private citizen prior to buying that weapon or what have you. Get familiar with that weapon. Take the safety class because you don't want an unfortunate accident to happen and a child is injured with that weapon or what have you, or another family member, an adult or what have you, just because you didn't know how to handle it or how to secure it.
Right. We got a question from Lynn B. Good morning, sir. Can you shed light on the new constitutional carry bill that goes along with what we're talking about? Thank you, Lynn B.
Okay. So Florida right now is discussing, it's on the floor in Tallahassee. That's our state capital. It's on the floor right now for concealed carry without a concealed carry permit in the state of Florida. Should this bill pass, it simply means that, hey, I don't have to go down and get a background check. I don't have to go down and get a concealed weapons permit. I, as a resident of the state of Florida, I can carry my weapon concealed everywhere I go within Florida. Now, when we say stuff like that, again, what we were just talking about with firearms, you have to look at a safety factor. There are certain things that come into play for an individual in Florida with a concealed weapons permit as opposed to somebody without one. One of those things being the gun safety course I was just talking about. If I'm a concealed weapons permit carrier here in the state of Florida, I have taken a concealed weapons course or a firearm safety course, knowing that I'm going to be carrying that weapon. That's part of the getting that permit. Whereas if that bill is passed and made into law, you as a private citizen, that you now they're saying, hey, for whatever reason, if it's made into law and they say, hey, you don't have to have a concealed weapons permit to carry concealed. Now that means anybody out here in the state of Florida can carry concealed. They haven't been through the same training or same safety courses that those with the proper credentials have gone through. That's first and foremost when you're talking about something like that. The second thing is people should not, within Florida, they should not mistake that with saying, okay, now I can carry concealed in Florida, so I'm gonna drive across the state line into Georgia and still carry concealed. No, that's Florida that's saying you can carry concealed without a permit if it goes through. You cross that line into Georgia carrying concealed, now you're under Georgia law. Georgia, they say, hey, you have to have a concealed weapons permit. Now you just violated Georgia law. Yeah. So ultimately, I would say the best thing to do is just do it the old-fashioned way. Just still go out and get the concealed weapons permit properly and take the training course and go ahead and carry the weapon. You won't have any issues to run into at that point.
Yeah. Julie Keenan pre-roll. This has already passed in the state of Georgia as of April 2022. So as we see, because it's on the floor in Florida, it's passed in Georgia. So this is something that is trickling across the United States of America. So you need to be aware of each state that you're in, what the laws are and everything, because you don't want to get caught out there not having the proper credentials that you're supposed to have, just like driving a car without a license. You don't want to get caught up with that. So, wow. So let me ask you this: what if all these, say if the United States of America goes across the board where nobody has to have that concealed carry permit at all anymore, where do you see problems in that? Do you see problems with that? Look, you got that little smirk. I seen it coming. How big of an issue could it become?
Again, I'm gonna say this, and again, I'm speaking from personal experience because I know the kind of training and so forth I've had with firearms. You know how to handle them, how to be aware of my surroundings when discharging a firearm and so forth. These types of things are crucial when you're talking about somebody having the responsibility of carrying a firearm around. That's the potential to take someone's life. Mm-hmm. So I would feel more comfortable knowing that somebody has gone through every step possible to make sure they know how to carry that weapon and to do it safely, as opposed to an individual that just says, oh, okay, now I can carry a gun anytime I want because the state says I can. I'm gonna run in here and go buy one. And next thing you know, they're running around town, toting this gun, pulling it out whenever they feel like pulling it out, acting like the Wild Wild West. You know, you have to, there's a huge responsibility that comes when you comes with owning or carrying rather a firearm. Huge responsibility. I still carry a firearm to this day, concealed, but I'm also a concealed weapons, licensed concealed weapons, not to mention as a retired law enforcement officer in the state of Florida, I have the right to still carry. But with that in mind, because of my training, I'm always mindful if I have to draw that weapon in defense of my life or someone else's life, I'm always mindful of my surroundings. You know, hey, if I have to throw rounds in this direction, is there a possibility it's going to hit some innocent citizen who has nothing to do with the incident that's going on? See, these are the things you take into account when you have a concealed weapons permit, as opposed to those that don't have the permit.
Mm. Yeah, you have a regard for innocent life that may be in the vicinity and everything. So here's another question that came up, Malcolm Hill. For home protection, would you recommend rubber rounds to temporarily stop a person or traditional rounds to permanently stop someone? That's you know, I never thought about that. And when it first came up, I was looking at it, I'm like, So what do you think, man? Talk to us.
I'm going to say again.
I already know what you're going to say again.
I'm going to throw this out there again, bro.
Uh-huh.
You come up into my home where you have not been invited. You invade my home. I can only assume that you mean to do me bodily harm, serious bodily harm, or to take my life. So with that being said, as cynical as this may sound, I'm not about to hit you with a rubber round when you come kicking my door in at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning because you want to come in there and try to take whatever you can out of my house. Hey, you were just in the wrong place. You picked the wrong house at the wrong time. I'm going to tell you that. It's not going to be a rubber round that's going to hit you. The next thing they're going to need to do is call a bus to come pick you up. Not an ambulance, but call the funeral home to come collect you.
You know, that goes into something else, man. And we hear this conversation come up a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times when law enforcement officers shoot 10, 15 rounds to stop somebody or anything like that. So I'm going to ask this question because I know a lot of people ask it when these things happen, but are law enforcement officers trained to stop, disarm, or kill? Because, and I asked that question facetiously, but I ask it because I remember years ago, and it's been probably when I was a kid, where the main thing we heard about law enforcement was that you guys were trained per se to disengage whatever weapon they have or anything. So the question comes in sometimes we see this is, they had to shoot him 10 times. They couldn't have just shot him in the arm. They couldn't have shot him in the leg. You know, all these different questions come up. So I asked that question because from a regular civilian standpoint, when you see these things about, you know, a guy was shot 5 times for robbing a store, just say for instance, for robbing a store, 5 times, you need to shoot him. You need to shoot him 5 because I've never been shot. I'm just bringing it up. I've never been shot. But I think if you shoot me 1 time, I'm folding up like an envelope. That's just me. That's just me. Now, somebody else may have the adrenaline. They may be on drugs. I get all that. But come on, man. Talk to me. Help me understand something.
So again, when you're talking about, we're talking about firearms, use of deadly force. Most law enforcement agencies train their personnel. You shoot to eliminate the threat, to stop the threat. Now, some people, maybe 1 shot will do it. And like you just said, you get shot once, you're going to say, hey, I'm done.
No more. No more.
Right. Whereas you can get an individual maybe that's high on a certain controlled substance. Maybe that 1 gunshot is not going to do it for them. They're going to still keep coming at you. So you're going to keep throwing a round down at them. You're trained to stop them until the threat is stopped. Then you're going to stop firing that weapon. Now, as far as the thing goes about arms or legs or what have you, this is deadly force. Unlike what you may see in a movie or in the TV or what have you, firearms are not utilized to solely just injure or slow somebody down. In real life, law enforcement is trained, a firearm is for use of deadly force, period. When you have that adrenaline dump, and again, I'm telling you based on what I've known throughout my career, when you have that adrenaline dump, when you're engaging with a firearm, it's easier to hit someone's center mass with all of this right here, as opposed to looking to try to hit them in the arm or in the leg. You're not going to be focused on that small spot. It's easier to aim for that big spot to try to get the rounds into. So it's a use of deadly force for a reason, because now you're saying that someone or something has gotten so far out of hand where I have to throw rounds into them to try to eliminate this threat to either myself or someone else. I'm not trying to wound this threat. I'm trying to eliminate it. So you have incidents, you have actual incidents that have occurred over the years where individuals with a knife, law enforcement is trained within a reactionary gap. An individual with a knife that knows exactly what they're doing with this knife, if they're within a certain amount of feet of somebody with a gun, they can get to you and cut you well before you get 2 good rounds off to them. I mean, so, if I'm within 20 feet of you, and you're coming at me, you know how to use this knife, you've been trained with it. Am I going to try to focus on shooting you in a leg or in the arm or whatever? No, I'm trying to stop you from cutting me with that knife or possibly killing me, because that's what you're coming at me for, is to kill me. Yeah. So again, deadly force is what firearms are used for, not to wound, not to do trick shots or so forth, if you will. Deadly force. Will you pull a gun sometimes? Have I pulled my gun sometimes during my career to discourage somebody from doing something silly? Absolutely. Because again, I don't know you from Adam. I don't know what your intentions are towards me, but I'm going to make sure at the end of the night I was going home safely. So there you go.
And that was something I was going to say. And I know we asked these questions that I asked, and I appreciate that answer. But a lot of times we don't take into account the intent of the person that you're trying to subdue or you're trying to stop and everything like that. So that's why I wanted to ask that question. It's one of those things, man, when you sit back and you think about it, because being a military veteran, I never deployed. I never had to go in the war zone or anything like that. But I always run through my mind, if I had to be in that situation, I can always say what I think I would do.
Mm-hmm.
But until I'm in that situation, I don't know what I would do.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? So I think it's the same thing with police officers, but I think it's also that thing of where when we see it happen, the first thing we do visually is think, man, that's a little excessive, don't you think? Mm-hmm. Not understanding the whole threat, we don't know the whole story per se.
Right.
It's just one of those things.
Yeah. And again, dealing with it, I'm going to say this again, from dealing with it, 2 different incidents during my law enforcement career involving shootings. I'll say this, it's easy to sit back Monday morning and armchair quarterback what was done on Saturday or Sunday, because now you got time to sit back with your cup of coffee and say, well, I think I would have handled it like this, this, and this. Whereas when you're actually involved in that incident, you have seconds to make a response to respond to a deadly force situation and make a decision whether or not I'm going to have to pull this trigger and possibly kill this individual, or if I'm going to retreat, or if I'm just going to just give up, just throw my hands up and say, I'm going to let them kill me.
Right.
For me, the third one is not an option. I'm not just going to throw my hands up and let you take me out. Right. Again, going back to the whole home invasion thing, I'm going to do what I got to do to defend myself, to save myself, to save my family. And that's the cut and dry of it. Self-preservation at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said, I got to protect me.
That's it.
As well, Julie Kennedy-Pirro, it's obvious that our country has a mental health crisis. How do you feel about medical professionals going on calls with patrol? Very good question. Thank you.
So I have no problem with that. I think I do encourage that as far as medical professionals dealing more with law enforcement. Most agencies, again, going back through my experience, most agencies, those types of resources are made available to you at all times. If you need to talk to a therapist, if you need to go sit down with a therapist, if you need to have them come out to you, those are made available at all times. Part of the hiring process, which I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, part of the hiring process for most law enforcement agencies, you have to see a psychiatrist prior to even being sworn in. You have to, that's part of the process, part of running your background and all of that. You have to sit down with a psychiatrist, and it's extensive. I want to say anywhere from 5 to 8 hours worth of testing and talking with this individual. It's very extensive.
You just answered the question that came up. It's not to cut you off, but you said, how many hours of psychological training does an officer get?
Anywhere from 5 to 8 hours. And that's just the initial to be able to get the job, because they want to make sure you're of sound mind. You talk about somebody walking around with a loaded firearm on a daily basis for their job. They want to make sure you're of sound mind to be able to tote this firearm without snapping or going crazy and saying, oh, I'm going to take out 5 people today just for giggles or what have you. So it's huge. It's huge. And again, going back to that whole thing about a code of silence, and so to speak, you work with these individuals on a day in and day out in law enforcement. I know our agency, they work 12-hour shifts, the guys in uniform. So you get to know some of these people better than you know your own family because you spend more time with them. If I'm noticing little things here and there and so forth, it's my responsibility to go to somebody and say, hey, I'm noticing this about, hey, I'm noticing this about Collins, man. He's acting a little unstable. We might have to go ahead and, pull him in, remove his firearm, go get him some professional help. It's nothing, it's no shame in that. But what is shameful is if you sit back, you ignore those signs. Down the road, Collins does something and pulls his firearm unnecessarily and kills somebody just because he felt like doing it. I hope you can sleep with yourself at night because I know I couldn't.
Right.
And that's that whole integrity thing, man. You got to do what's right at all times, no matter who's looking. You got to do what's right at all times, no matter what the circumstances may be, no matter what you think the outcome is going to be. It's your responsibility to do what's right at all times. It's a huge responsibility for a law enforcement officer, whether it be male or female, to walk around day in and day out with that firearm. You don't know when you leave home every day to do that job. You don't even know if you're coming home to see your family once your shift is over.
Yeah. I was going to say, I'm going to leave it alone, though. I'm going to leave that alone. But I will ask this question, man, because everybody's watched the show. And if this is your first time tuning in, I appreciate you. But on this show, anytime that I see Black men that have been arrested, sentenced for crimes they haven't committed, 28 years, served 28 years, served it. And we talked about it yesterday. There was a man, 57-year-old Sidney Holmes, spent more than 34 years behind bars for carjacking near Fort Lauderdale. He was sentenced to 400 years. 400 years. Initially, they wanted to give him 800 years, but the judge said that's too extreme, so they gave him 400 years. He served 34 years, and he never committed the crime. I always talk about on here these things, and I ask about accountability. Accountability. You're a police officer, you arrest somebody, evidence doesn't show this guy did anything or anything like that, but he gets sent to jail for 40 years, ends up serving 17 years. They find out it wasn't him. He's exonerated or whatever may happen. How come there's no accountability for the officers, the DA, prosecuting attorneys, the judge, any of those people? Because you're talking about you took away a person's life over false allegations or false evidence or planted evidence or any of that. Mm-hmm. As a police officer, law enforcement officer, everyday citizen, how does this happen? And you may not know all the details, but it starts with the arresting officer to me.
It does. It does.
So how are they able to do this and there's no accountability ever done to those officers?
Well, again, like you said, it does start with the arresting officer because it's your job as the officer responding to whatever the incident is to make sure you gather all the facts and circumstances to make a decision based on what's on probable cause to possibly be able to place somebody under arrest at that point. There's certain checks and balances. Again, I can speak from my agency, certain checks and balances. When I type that booking sheet to send you down to the jail, my supervisor is going to review that. And he or she, it's their job to read through it and make sure, hey, does this meet the criteria for state statute or whatever to go ahead and incarcerate this individual just into the jail? Now, that's the first step. The second part is now when this case goes over to a member of the state attorney's office, that's our prosecutors here in Florida. The state attorney's office then is going to move forward with either prosecuting this, pleading it out, or dropping the charges altogether. So if all of those boxes are being checked, it shouldn't even get to that level of where you're saying that this individual was falsely incarcerated, not accused, but falsely incarcerated. Because at trial, all these facts and circumstances have to be laid out at trial. Nothing can be hidden from the defense. Nothing that the prosecution is presenting can be hidden. So all of this has to be made of any evidence that the state has against you that has to be made available to your defense attorney. So there's no surprises during trial. So somewhere it sounds like, and I don't have all the facts and circumstances of that case. Somewhere there was a breakdown within the process of all the facts and circumstances which were presented to the court for a ruling to be made of guilty. Somewhere there was a serious breakdown where they made a ruling of guilty, but obviously all the facts and circumstances were not presented, because now you have a man that was he was tried and convicted on it, where now you're finding out now he was actually innocent. Right. So there was this huge breakdown, and I'm sure somebody's going to investigate that if I was
if
him.
If he has the means, and that's the problem.
Right. So the second part of that now, what you just said, if he has the means, in his situation, if they just confirmed that he did not commit those crimes, there are so many law offices around here nowadays that will pick that case up and run with it, because you're looking at a huge, not that it's going to get him his time, his years that were spent behind bars. It won't get him that time back, but you're looking at a huge civil suit now, because you took, like you said, you took this man's right of freedom, which is constitutionally bound. You took that right of freedom away from him and convicted him of a crime which he did not commit. So somebody owes him.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm glad you said that, because it's too part for me, and I'm gonna throw this out there. And I know we got a question in here, so y'all bear with me, but because I'm passionate about this thing. But here's the thing too. Number one, we only see these cases happen to people that look like us. Mm-hmm. That's number one. That's the first thing I want to put out there. Number two, yeah, he's going to end up, if he's found exonerated or whatever, he's going to get out after serving how many years he did for something he didn't do. And you bring up the fact that he can do a civil suit or there's some type. But doing my research and doing reading, there's a lot of states that specifically put things in their laws that if you're wrongly accused or you serve time, that there is no compensation coming to you and you can't do a civil suit. And then this other case that I seen where the guy did 18 years, he did 18 years and they set him up because somebody else that had his same name, because he had a record or something, they used his picture in place of this guy's picture to send him to jail for 18 years. And now he's trying to fight to get out. He got released the other day, but there's no recourse for him to go back and try to go against them. And then the officer who finally admitted that what he did, they said the statute of limitations ran out. So there's always a safety net per se for the wrongdoing, but there's never an uplifting of the person who was wrongfully done. And I think that's the biggest problem with me. And that's where I'm passionate about this, because when we see these things, man, it just, I always bring it up. Think about someone taking away from you your last 18 years. Think about what you've done in the last 18 years, and now let somebody just take that away from you. And not just the 18 years that you've done. You're talking about 18 years that the person never even got an opportunity to do anything. That's a hard pill to swallow, no matter how it comes out. But I wanted to ask you that from a law enforcement side. But it does start there.
And I'm gonna say this too, man. If you look at Lady Justice, the statue of Lady Justice, she's blindfolded.
With the blindfold, yeah.
Right. And I tell people this all the time, and they laugh at it, but I'm being dead serious about it. She's blindfolded. She doesn't know which way to go with these scales that she holds in her hand. She has no idea which way to go. If one thing historically, every person in this country should realize, the more money you make, the better chance of you beating whatever charge is put before you. I don't care if 1,000 people saw you do it. The more money that you have behind you, the better chance of you beating that charge. And that's just, I'm just being just as honest as I can, because I've seen it. The more money you have, the better chances, because that means you can hire a better attorney. You brought up a very valid point when you talk about the average person, one of us or what have you. We may not have that money to go out and hire a Johnny Cochran or what have you. So we have to, 9 times out of 10, we have to use a public defender. public defender up to their ears in cases, man. They're not going to fight for you the way that attorney that you would pay $400 or $500 an hour to is going to fight for that case. So again, if your pockets are deep, it's a much better chance you may beat that case compared to the average individual that's incarcerated for something where they don't have those kind of resources to be able to say, I'm going to hire the best attorney available.
And that goes into when we see somebody do 18 or 34 years or whatever for something they didn't do. And then you got a guy that did do something that gets 6 months probation.
Right.
You know, and
Right.
that's where the discord comes in, man. But let's move on from that because I can go on that all day. Malcolm Hill, is de-escalation a part of the process in dealing with the public in intense situations, or does it depend on the situation?
Great question. I'm going to say that would always be the first step. Again, based on my experience, if you can de-escalate something and tone it down and get everybody to disperse peacefully or what have you, or get the people that are causing the incident to disperse peacefully, then yes, that's always going to be the first step. That does it depend on the situation? Again, absolutely. If you have a group of individuals that are maybe just starting to get heated and they're yelling and fussing at one another compared to somebody that's already brandished a weapon, yeah, that's going to change the response of how law enforcement is going to move in and deal with that incident. 100%.
And we got this last question from Malcolm Hill. With taking payouts from the pensions of police officers who are caught in the wrong from lawsuits filed against the police instead of taxpayers covering the payout, curb some of the false arrests?
Well, here's the problem with that. If you're going to go after the individual civilly, which a lot of people do, they go after the agency and the individual officer. You might get $5 from the officer, but you're going to get so many hundreds of thousands, maybe millions from the agency because the agency is protected for that. Whereas the individual officer, you don't know what their financial portfolio looks like. You know, you can sue them, but yeah, okay, you may win. Okay, here, I'll give you $5 a month until this $5 million is paid off.
Right.
So,
yeah. So you don't go after the little fish, you go after the big fish.
No, because again, when you're talking about law enforcement is a profession. You don't have anything. You don't have anything considered to be an amateur law enforcement officer. There's no such thing. You have security guards, and then you have law enforcement professionals. They are professionals. They are held and governed by a certain set of standards. They have to have so many hours of training to be able to hold that title, law enforcement officer. The agency's responsibility is to make sure that those officers, their training, whether it be firearms, CPR, driving, defensive tactics, those are your 4 high liabilities, by the way. It's the agency's responsibility to make sure each one of their people that are employed by them, each one of their sworn law enforcement officers that are employed by them are keeping up with those standards. If I'm skipping over some of those standards and I have not come up for my most recent training or gone to my most recent training, for whatever reason, I slipped through the cracks, that falls back on the agency.
Right.
You know, even though I'm the one that did whatever the incident was that's causing you to sue the agency, still, the agency's job is to govern me and make sure I'm going to my annual trainings like I'm supposed to go to and so forth. So they're ultimately responsible.
And we got this question from Dr. Tina M. going back to the mental health. Do you think law enforcement should have an annual or biannual psychological evaluations as they are required to go to a firearms range?
I do. And I'll say this, you see in law enforcement, you see the worst of the worst pretty much on a daily basis. You always deal with negative pretty much on a daily basis. I do think that would be helpful to make law enforcement officers go through some sort of psych eval yearly. If nothing more, just to be able to say, okay, you know what? We can go ahead and clear our minds and know that, hey, this guy's good for another year. We don't have to worry. We possibly don't have to worry about him blowing his lid, within the next year. Because like anything else, you get people that see and deal with everybody else's negative stuff. And I used to tell people this all the time. As a law enforcement officer, the uniformed guys that are coming out there to your house or to your business whenever you call them, they're taking this in daily. They're absorbing all of this stuff daily. Their output, their release for it, should they have something? Yes. Are the resources there through the agency like EAP and so forth? Yes. Now, how many officers take EAP?
Not much.
No. Because again, it's one of those things that it kind of puts a black cloud over your head. Like, okay, if I go and take EAP, now it's deemed that maybe something wrong with me, so I'm not even going to ask for EAP. And then those that know maybe they need to take EAP, that don't take it, do they have another way of releasing that, venting or what have you? Most of them don't. So at some point in time, do they end up doing something like the Memphis situation or what have you? Absolutely. And so again, I think it would be crucial. I think it would be very helpful if you had psychological evals on a yearly basis. You have agencies that are worried about doing a physical evaluation of their personnel every year, but they don't do it mentally.
So let me add this on there, man. I'm gonna ask, and I'm gonna put this out there too, because when we talk about law enforcement, we concentrate on, like with the mental health, just touch mental health. This ain't going against anybody asked the question, but when we talk about mental health, we look at the mental health evaluation to see if they're fit to be an officer per se, right? But how many of us take into account that these officers are still human beings just like us? Think about when you go to your job. Think about when you go to your job every day. How you do your job and how you feel about your job that day and what ticks you off that day about your job could hinder on the fact of what happened before you left your house.
Mm-hmm.
Could hinder on a disagreement that you had with your spouse. Mm-hmm. Could hinder on the fact that your kid is acting up in school and you had to go see that teacher and talk to them again. All these things come into play with everyday people that go to their jobs. We have to look at the same thing when we talk about law enforcement officers. I think we got to look at these law enforcement officers as being human as well, with the same emotions and life goes on outside of the uniform. And I think that's where I think the disconnect comes in. Sometimes, I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes.
Right. You're right.
Because we don't take into account that this reaction may have been from something other than that situation. Because we do it. It's human. It's human nature to do that. And it just goes with that. Dr. Tina, thank you. Highly agree. Great response. It's only done after an incident, which could mean 20 years on the force. Wow. Yeah.
And elaborating on that a little bit more, I used to tell when I was a training officer, I was responsible for training new officers as they came to the agency, physically taking them out in the field, answering real calls for service and so forth. And one of my biggest things I used to emphasize to most of these rookies, so to speak, coming out, when you come out for your shift that day, your head has got to be in what you came to do for that day. Because if your mind, like you were just saying, if you got into an argument at home or what have you, before you left to come to work and your mind is still wrapped around that, that means you're not focused on what's going on out here, which that's a possibility of you getting yourself hurt and or killed, or getting somebody else hurt and or killed. So it's important, like you just said, people think, once you have that badge and that uniform on, that you deflect everything. That's not the case. And it's not. You see, I've seen I've seen enough death to probably last me a lifetime as a law enforcement officer. And that's just me personally. I've seen enough natural death and so forth and accidents. I've seen enough death to last me a lifetime. And I don't think anybody should have to be subjected to that doesn't have some sort of out, some sort of releasing and venting that and saying, okay, now I can exhale, so.
Yeah. And it goes back to, and you just said it, we don't know what these officers see. We don't know what they've dealt with. And you have officers, just like you have military members, just like you have everyday human beings walking around with PTSD that may not even have been diagnosed.
Correct.
Or it just hasn't bubbled to the surface and they haven't had a reaction to that to cause them to act out of character or anything like that. So I'm glad we touched on that, because I think one of the main reasons I wanted to have you on was to talk about the things we talk about, but also put a human understanding into what law enforcement is about, because the person puts on a uniform just like you put on your clothes to go to work, whether it's a suit and tie, whether it's what is it, coveralls or whatever you may wear to work.
Right.
This person still has a life outside of that. Now, I'm not saying that, anything they do wrong, we should take into account that they had something else going on. Now,
Right,
I'm not going
right.
to say that.
Right.
We have to look at it from the bigger scope of we all have something going on in our lives other than our job.
Correct.
Because law enforcement is still a job profession, as you said before.
Correct.
So, man, I appreciate this conversation, man, and we're gonna wrap it up because we done went past the 1 hour mark, and I try to host in 1 hour. Yeah, and it's not, but we're gonna have you back. You're gonna be a consistent contributor to this when we want to talk about this thing.
Brother. Anytime.
Yeah. And everybody who made comments, hey, I appreciate it because it helped the conversation flow and the questions coming in with things that some of them I had wrote down, a lot of them I didn't even think about. So that's why we do this show every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. Again, we were talking this morning with Phil McCurdy, retired. Let me put retired in front of that. Law enforcement officer with a wealth of knowledge, man. I appreciate you coming on, bro. And we're gonna continue to have you back, man.
Looking forward to it.
Your daughter said you did great, big guy. Nice job, Phil. Yeah, man, I appreciate it, man. Because and I talk about a lot of things. And
thank you, Tina.
Before. Yeah, thank you, Tina, for the knowledge you dropped as well. But I've done a lot of shows before, and I've always pinpointed on what I was talking about people getting out of jail after so many years, and the accountability factor. And to hear it from a police officer or a retired law enforcement officer makes a big difference, because sometimes we just judge from afar.
Right.
We don't know the inner workings of everything's going on. And I wanted to have you on because we had discussed it when I first met you about you coming on, because it gives a different perspective of the other side.
Correct.
That a lot of people never hear about. Because one thing that I know, the ones that you see on retired enforcement officers, you see on CNN, MSNBC, and they were always at this echelon most of the time.
Right.
They retired from this echelon up at this, and not saying that you're down here, but they retired up here.
No, you're right.
We want to talk to on my show. What I want to do, I want to interview people who are the normal everyday me.
That's it.
Just like me.
That's it.
Because we see things differently at this level,
yes,
than they do at that level. So I appreciate that, man. I appreciate you coming in, and we'll have you back on. Sandra Johnson, great job, guys. MB, well done, sir. Appreciate you. So that's going to wrap it up for today, man. I appreciate everybody coming in every Saturday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, 7 a.m. Pacific. That's what we do here on Speak on the Show. We broadcast live on YouTube and Facebook. If you're a first-time listener, subscribe to the YouTube page. Also, you can go back, watch the old shows, listen to old shows. And I'm going to put this out there again. Phil's already volunteered because this is going to be a good conversation. We're going to have a barbershop talk. We're going to have a show where we have men. We're going to be on here, and we're just going to be vulnerable and talk about what's going on with us and how we feel about certain things. So I got 3 people so far. I want to have myself and 5. I'm just going to moderate. I'm going to let them talk. I do enough talking, but I want to have at least 5. So I have 3. We're going to have them on, and we got some other things coming along too. So y'all stay tuned. But yeah, man. Yeah. That's what we do. Yeah, I'm excited, man, because this was good. It was a good show, man. It turned out better than I thought. As far as for me, because
long time coming since we talked about it.
And you blame me on that one, bro. I had some things.
No. I'm messing. I got to pick at you. I got to mess with you.
I had some loose ends I had to tie the knots.
I'm just messing with you, man. Anytime, brother. I'm looking forward to coming on here many more times. Have people drop as many questions as they want. I'm here for you.
For sure. So, as I always say before we sign off, love yourself, love one another, keep your head up, and most definitely keep your faith in God. I'll see y'all again next week. Appreciate you again, my brother, and we out. Holla.
Thank you.